So I want to start today just by giving a simple land acknowledgement. So we gather today on the indigenous lands, homelands of the Shoshone-Bannock tribe. So I want to acknowledge this land and recognize their continuing connection to the land, to the water, and to their ancestors. I'd also like to express my appreciation and respect for the Shoshone-Bannock tribal members, past, present, and future. The Nimipu, or Nez Perce tribe, are the original caretakers of the land on which I live and work in Lewiston. In Nimipu-Timpt, the Nez Perce language, thank you is Katsiaoyao. Can you say that with me? Katsiaoyao. Katsiaoyao, very good. So expressing our thanks and appreciation. So, as Serena said, my name is Sarah Graham. I know some of you fairly well. My parents are Martin and Karen Graham. I originally come from Michigan, but was raised by my parents with my brothers in Western Washington. On our mother's side, we are Holbeins and Tauners, descendants of the German painter Hans Holbein and hymn composer Daniel B. Towner. The Holbeins and Tauners arrived in the original colonies from England and Germany and settled in the North, participated in the Revolution, and supported the Union cause in the Civil War. On our father's side, we're Laskovskis, after our great-grandfather who came from Lithuania through Ellis Island and changed his name to Graham several years later. On our father's side, we are also Bullocks, Pittmans, and Kings, who mostly came from England and settled in the American South, where they fought in the Revolution and supported the cause of the Confederacy in the Civil War. I now live in Lewiston, Idaho, with my two children, who are both Ashanti and from Kumasi, Ghana. Okay, so diversity. This word, right? We hear this word all the time. Let's get this right here. Oh, so you can ignore, the Slido didn't load here, so I apologize. I wanted to do a interactive thing. It didn't work, but that's okay. We can kind of shout out if you are comfortable. We hear this word all the time, and it means all kinds of different things. It's kind of taken on a life of its own, and it creates a different affect in people depending on where you read it, where you see it, where you hear it. So what are some of the thoughts, words, or phrases that come to your mind when you see or hear the word diversity? Anybody?
Differences and similarities.
Differences and similarities, good. What else?
Race.
Race?
I think of politics.
Politics. Okay. Anything else? Sorry? Cultures, yeah.
A lot of interesting things.
A lot of interesting things. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
When I hear diversity, to me, I think I need to shut my mouth and listen.
Shut my mouth and listen. If only all of us could do that more, right? Yeah. No comment. No, just kidding. Seth and I go way far back.
We don't need to talk about it.
I'll tell you later. I got stories. Yeah, so we think about a lot of things when we think about diversity, and particularly now when we hear diversity training. And let's see here. I've found there to be a lot of resistance from people when they hear the word diversity. I've heard people say, "Oh, great, not again." Or really, did we seriously have to talk about this? Comments like this that I hear from people, which are completely valid, not invalidating them. But there are a lot of thoughts that people have when we think about diversity training. So well-respected psychologist Daryl Wing-Soo recently wrote that research on resistance to diversity training revealed 3 ways that this resistance is manifested. So the first is cognitive, this belief that it doesn't exist anymore. It's a thing of the past, we don't need to deal with diversity. Emotional, so with awareness, people often experience guilt, anger, defensiveness, avoidance, hopelessness, helplessness, and then behavioral, where sometimes those feelings of helplessness or powerlessness or hopelessness turn into an excuse for non-action. So ways to think about this. Oop, okay, well, that's gonna be my next thing. Okay. Thank you so much. So I wanna challenge us to, thank you, to reframe thinking about diversity as cultural competency. And that rather than it being something we have to do, that it's something that we're not doing, we're being. That we're not adding things to the billions of things that all of us already have to do, right? But that we're simplifying in a way as we go through this. So, we're gonna play ball. So here's the rules. I've got this little ball, and I got this exercise when I adopted my kids. We had a fantastic therapist who had this really cool, like, it was a big ball, but I used a little one and created it smaller because traveling with carry-on, I didn't have room for that. But it had all these cool things on it. So in Illinois, they have what's called adoption preservation therapy. And anyone who adopts a child has free access to this. So counseling, all kinds of services that are free for anybody who adopts, which was fantastic. And so we had this amazing therapist that worked with our family. And so she brought this ball to get kids talking, to get our kids talking, to get kind of conversations going. And it was things like, your favorite color, the food that you hate, what do you like to do, how do certain things make you feel? So I kind of adapted that to this diversity ball, I guess we'll call it. So the rules are, when you catch it, whatever's under your left thumb, I just chose left thumb, whatever's under your left thumb, I want you to respond to that prompt. If you're not sure how to respond, you can ask your neighbor, or you can pass if you're not comfortable, and that is totally fine. There are no judgments, there are no right or wrong answers. It's simply, answer, whatever you want. So nobody here will pass judgment on anything you say. And like I said, if you're not comfortable, you can pass, right? And feel safe about it. So I'm gonna.
May I ask that you repeat it into the microphone?
Oh, I'm sorry. It just feels really
As
loud.
people do it, can you repeat it into the microphone?
Oh yeah. So everybody hears. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm gonna toss this out. Somebody can catch. Whew. So where's your left thumb? And read the prompt and.
How is diversity celebrated in your community?
How is diversity celebrated in your community? It's okay if you don't know. It's okay to say you don't know.
I don't know because I don't feel like a lot of it is.
Okay. Don't know, doesn't feel like a lot of it is, and that's a great answer. Very good. So you can toss it to someone else. One way to encourage empathy in your program.
I guess personally I'm a loud talker and I talk a lot and I'm kind of a single source of information, of course, in my ensemble. So for me it's similar is to be quiet and listen and talk less. And so creating, I should say, by greeting all of my students every week at some point and then being quiet.
Okay, yeah, so listening, being quiet, greeting all of your students. Good, excellent. Everyone's avoiding. Don't give me the ball. Oh, thank you. That's good.
Hello. Is it? Okay. A way to increase one's cultural competency. Again, just listening, doing the work of doing some research. If you're doing for me, if I'm trying to do a piece, I try to not do that piece unless I know something about the culture that I'm doing it, and not just because it sounds cool. I used to just do music because it sounded cool, and now I'm like, well, I should probably know something about this before I program it. So that's a
Awesome.
goal of mine.
Really
So,
good.
There you go.
Really good. Boom.
A time when you have experienced bias or discrimination. I don't know if I have one personally, but I do about my husband. He's trans, and so before he transitioned, he applied for a position through Home Depot and was not hired because he presented as a woman. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
An example of age discrimination. Huh. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Okay, I'm just gonna go with my amazing mom, who actually is 90 years old, and she's living in a wonderful, wonderful facility where her mind is intact and everyone around her is not, and people assume she can't think, but she can. She's very physically disabled, and people make the wrong assumptions about her because she can't walk and she can't get around, but she still can think, and they assume she knows nothing because everybody else around her is struggling that way.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Let's do one more. Boom, all the way over. Ooh. Everyone's like, I'm not going to catch it. I'm not going to catch it. Question. All right, yeah.
It says, do you have family members who are different ethnically from you? I think I have some in-laws and some people that are married into my family, but I don't have any family members myself necessarily, direct bloodline. So that's interesting sometimes to get to know brothers and sisters-in-law who have very different backgrounds.
Yeah, awesome. That's good, thanks.
Do you want to throw it? You can throw it, but she's got an answer.
I just wanted to speak to your question, but maybe I'm breaking the rules. My husband has two adopted sisters, and one is Latina. She's from Colombia. And the other one, and this is so very interesting, in that the reason why they were able to adopt her at the time, 25 years ago, is because she is biracial, and she was considered special needs, which, oh my goodness, how ridiculous, right? So her father was black, and her mother is Caucasian, and so they were 2 and 5 when I married my husband, so they've been in our family for a long time. And it's been very, very interesting to watch them grow up in a predominantly white community and find their identity. And now they're both in their 20s and have found both their birth mothers, and how wonderful that has been. But how they have been judged by what they look like, even though their upbringing was very predominantly anyway, just lots of different issues there.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for sharing. I'm going to ask you to hold on to the ball, because I may have you throw it later. So there's some other questions, and actually when we didn't get to them, but that's okay, I didn't want to plan it, about things like characteristics that describe your personality. What did you do after school when you were growing up? Right? Before there were video games. Yeah, right. But some of these questions to think about that have to do with us, right? That I think are important to think about. So cultural competence, when we think about this, we think about often other cultures, other people, this outward manifestation. And it really begins with knowing and understanding our own identities and who I am, not what I do, right? We come to these conferences and, yeah, so many degrees and studied with this person. That doesn't tell me anything about who a person is. So I chose to introduce myself in such a way that's similar to the way many of my Indigenous friends and colleagues do. They tell about who they are, who their family is from, what land they are from, the connection to that, I think, which is really important. If I were Hawaiian, we just had Dr. Jay Saplan, if you know him, he's fantastic, from the University of Hawaii. And in his culture, they sing, they chant their introduction to one another, and they chant their entire lineage every time they meet or are with people. It's really kind of a fascinating way to introduce oneself. So we may come back to that, but I want to move on here. So if we look at this think about cultural competency. A couple years ago, for many reasons, I decided to start another master's degree, lifelong learning, right, in clinical mental health counseling. And as I've worked through that program curriculum, I've learned a lot about the importance of cultural competency in the field of counseling and really in life in general, because it's a study of society and relationships. And Daryl Wing-Sue and David Sue, who wrote a book, it's a textbook it's called Counseling the Culturally Diverse, for a multicultural counseling course I took. They said that cultural competency is superordinate to counseling competency. In other words, that has to be in place first. So, because education theory and practice, as most of us have learned it, is done in a very Euro or Western context using a Western practices, education is very similar. So I would assert that for the same reasons, cultural competency is superordinate to education competency. We've been trained to be largely monoculturally competent. That's changing. But I know, for example, when I was in graduate school, when I started in graduate school 20 years ago, I wanted to take ethnomusicology courses. I was really, really interested in taking some of the ethno courses at the university where I was doing my doctorate. And I was told no, that my committee said, no, your DMA is in choral conducting, so you need to just take the traditional coursework. Now, that's encouraged, but at that time, just 20 years ago, I was not encouraged. So I want to think about what this means for us. So I love this little graphic. It's all about culture, right? Attracts people, creates community, experience, destination, all of this. What else does this? We do this every day, like in our classrooms, right? In choral music, right? Music does this. Yeah, I love it. So we think about this. We've been taught generally to have sort of an etic perspective and worldview, which is basically that Western concepts and worldviews are universal and equally applicable across all cultures, as opposed to an emic perspective where worldviews and values exist within a cultural context. Now, often there's kind of a balance of the two, but those are sort of the two extremes that we think about. So I want to think about, if we view the world through just this one etic lens, you get a Western lens that's bound by one culture and therefore is a pretty biased view of the world, right? When you try to apply this one culture to everything else. So if we think about everything being different by different cultures, and that different worldviews exist within those, it's a different way to think about it. So an example of this is I don't know why it's doing that. Okay, to think about individualist and collectivist cultures. So individualist cultures primarily value individual independence, self-reliance, satisfying one's own needs before the needs of others, and the ability to care for oneself and self-sufficiency are the dominant characteristics, right? as opposed to collectivist, let's pull this whole thing up at one time. Okay, collectivist cultures, which place the primary value on the community and the family. The emphasis on family and community over individual needs or wants tends to be the dominant feature in collectivist cultures. Also, so protection of the community is also offered in exchange for loyalty to that community. Incidentally, anybody have any idea how much of the world, how many cultures in the world, what percentage you think are collectivist versus individualist? What do you think, 50-50, 60-40, what do you think? More collective than individual. Yeah, actually, it's close to 75% of the cultures in the world are collectivist cultures. Garrett and Hofstede do a examination of this, and they look at the cultural dimensions of all of these different things. So there's one that looks at power dynamics within cultures, and there's one that looks at individualism. And it gives scores. So 1 is the most extreme level of collectivism. 120 is the highest score for the most extreme level of individualism. Who do you think falls at the lowest level of that has the most collectivist societies? Any ideas? Anyone else? China? Eastern Hemisphere? Yeah, different ones. So that's what I thought. And I thought to myself, of course, I thought of my kids' culture in Ghana, which is also a very collectivist culture. The top one was Guatemala, which had a score of 6. Then Ecuador with a score of 8. And then Panama with a score of 11. So all Central and South American countries. What do you think were the most individualist? U.S., yeah. U.S. was at the top with a 91, though. Not up to 100, not over 100. What other ones do you think? England. Yep, England was third with 89. Australia, yeah. Australia surprised me a little bit. I didn't know that quite as much, but Australia had a 90. So, yeah, so it's kind of interesting to think about it that way. So we can kind of think about that. If somebody's raised in a collectivist culture, they're going to have a different view and different values than somebody who's raised in an individualist culture, right? And those views on singing and music probably are different as well. So if we think about this in a smaller context, like our own choral ensembles as being collectivist in nature, just in general what we do, we create this kind of collectivist microcosm in this individualist environment, right, with what we do. And what we do helps students develop cultural competency, just simply by singing in a choir, by being part of that group. Eve Ely said so many things yesterday that resonated with this exactly. One of the things he said is, the way your students behave in the ensemble is the way they behave in the community. They learn how to behave as a community in your community, right? So if they're learning how to care for one another, how to think about what other people are doing, adjust to other people in the way that they're singing or whatever they're doing, they're learning also how to behave as a part of a larger community. And he also quoted Aristotle. He said, quote, "True ensemble is a commendable knack of subordinating oneself for the benefit of the whole." Again, collectivism, right? Both of those things. So think about how the environment you create for your students is collectivist in nature, and how the environment you create for your students is individualist in nature. One's not better or worse than the other. They both have value. But it's good to be aware and kind of think about how we do this. So as we think about cultural competency, and I want to think about it in terms of a journey of cultural competency, because it's not a destination, it's not a journey to anywhere, it's of. There are kind of 4 stages we go through. So the first is awareness. So awareness of my own values, awareness of your values, somebody else's values. Then knowledge, comparing my values with other values, and then figuring out what I need to learn. What do I need to learn about both of these values? And then sensitivity. Do I approach other people and their experiences with openness? And if I don't, why? What's the reason for that? How do I feel and why do I have trouble with that? Do I judge cultures, other cultures that are different? Do I judge them as better or worse, or right or wrong, good or bad? Do I judge music based on what is better or worse, or good or bad, or right or wrong? And then competence. So how do I adjust my own behavior, my own thinking, my own teaching, my own way of being with my students and my ensembles to be more aware? And these don't necessarily just go 1, 2, 3, 4. I probably should design this like it's a circle instead of this way, because we tend to think of things hierarchically. We see something in one and we think that that's, the first. It's not really, right? We cycle through these things and they, we kind of go back and forth like any kind of a cycle. So you have in front of you a labyrinth. And so you're probably wondering why so far I haven't just given you a list of things like you should do this and this and this in your ensemble, in your classes, to be culturally competent and to be diverse and teach diversity. And I have to say, I've learned, it's been a long learning process for me, that is basically worthless. You can go find multicultural music. You learn, I think I'm going to use Sean as an example because you said this, that you, right, gosh, I should know about the music I'm teaching, right? So you start to do your own work. You've probably heard that from people before. Go research your music. But it wasn't until he was in a situation where he felt like he needed to do that happens. So I can give you a list of things to do. I can say, do this, this, and this. That's meaningless unless we do the work. And so I'm not going to tell you a bunch of things to do. I'm just going to talk about this process that we go through to learn how to do that for ourselves, because we'll all do that differently. So the Episcopal Church, I work at an Episcopal church, I have a little Episcopal church choir, and the Episcopal Church designed racial reconciliation is one of their main issues that they're working on right now. And they developed a curriculum, a racial justice curriculum called Sacred Ground. It's 10 sessions. It's largely done through film and readings and things like this. So I did the training for that and ran a circle just last year, starting another circle up this year. And it uses the Labyrinth as a model for this kind of a journey. And I love this imagery. Because you'll notice if you take one of the labyrinths in front of you and you kind of trace that, you'll notice there's one way in. It's not a maze. There's one way in. And when you get to the middle, there's one way out. And it's very much a representation of a journey we would take as we're developing cultural competence. That includes diversity, equity, inclusion, all of these things that we hear all the time that start to become meaningless, and cultures, all of these things. But most importantly, it involves ourselves, because we have to take ourselves into that space, into that journey. So rather than thinking about it as something we do going into that, I invite you to think about it as a way that we think about our surroundings and the people in those surroundings. It's, again, this idea of lifelong learning, making that a part of what we do. So that labyrinth, you'll notice there's a couple of different versions of it. It can look different. These kinds of journeys we take with all kinds of things in life, not just cultural competence, and you can do it more than once, and every time it's different. How many of you have seen the 1984 film Labyrinth? Anybody see this film? Anybody remember this film? David Bowie. It's kind of a weird film, I'll give you that. Jim Henson. But I want you to see this clip from this film. It should play. Do I push play? There we go.
Hello.
Did you say hello?
No, I said hello, but that's close enough.
You're a worm, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
You don't by any chance know the way through this labyrinth, do you?
Oh, me? Nah, I'm just a worm.
Oh,
Come inside and meet the missus.
no thank you, but I have to solve this labyrinth. But there aren't any turns or any openings or anything. It just goes on and on and...
Well, you ain't looking right. It's full of openings. It's just you ain't seeing them.
Well, where are they?
There's one just across there. It's right in front of you.
No, there isn't.
Come inside and have a nice cup of tea.
But there isn't an opening.
Of course there is. You try walking through it. You'll see what I mean.
What?
Go on then.
That's just wall. There's no way through.
Things are not always what they seem in this place. So you can't take anything for granted.
Hey!
Hey, hang on!
Thank you. That was incredibly helpful.
But don't go that way.
What was that?
I said don't go that way. Never go that way.
Oh, thanks.
So we're just not looking in the right place, right? There are all kinds of things that are in that labyrinth if we look to see them. It's full of mysteries and wonders and answers and questions, some that don't have answers. But in order to experience that, we have to look and choose to be vulnerable and choose to receive what we get during that journey. Some of us will choose to project or protect our rigidity and kind of be guided by allowing our own barriers to guide us through that journey, and that's fine. Others of us will do everything we can to remove barriers and engage with everything and anything that we encounter on the journey. Again, how many times did Eve yesterday say, be interested in everyone and everything, right? Always naturally curious. And then others still will be more selective in that journey, right? Choosing to engage with what's within their comfort zone, right? Which expands the more we do that. So the challenge is to kind of get out of the way and see and experience different ways of doing things and different ways of thinking about things. And removing barriers, simplifying, and removing these ideas that we've always been taught or believed are right or wrong or good or bad. Another way to frame this is to think about it as radical hospitality. So I like to use this example. So if you think about you're having a dinner party with 10 of your closest friends, and one is lactose intolerant, one is vegan, one's vegetarian, one is gluten-free. But you want to honor all of these friends together in this dinner party. So what do we naturally do? Don't serve them. Well, I mean, and that's an option, right? So you think about it. Don't serve them, or serve them all separately, right? But if you're going to serve all of them together and honor them together, you have to do some research, right? And spend some time thinking about it and figuring out how you can best do that, right? So it's kind of the same thing. Has anybody seen Come From Away? Has anybody watched this yet? Oh my gosh, only a couple of you? Okay. Do yourself a favor and just for one night subscribe to Apple Plus and watch Come From Away. Am I not wrong? I mean, it is the most incredible example of radical hospitality anywhere. These people, oh my gosh, it's pretty incredible. Not just that, but it's so well done, so well done. But if we think about this as radical hospitality in our choirs and how we engage radical hospitality and what that means for all of our participants and all of our singers. So our choirs are largely built on Eurocentric structures or hierarchies. And we're used to this. And dare I say, I'm going to use the word, a colonized structure and hierarchy, where we have one person in charge and have people following, right? And I challenge you to think about what gets in the way of radical hospitality, of our way of being together, of engaging every single person and their identity and background in a rehearsal, in that setting. I love this image on the right. I love circles without the conductor teacher at the center, but with the conductor teacher as a part of that circle, because that brings more equality to that's the situation into a rehearsal. And think about think about your last rehearsal and how much of what you said was a question and how much of what you said was a statement. What percentage of your classes or rehearsals are questions? What percentage are statements? And how that invites people into the experience. And so the other thing here I want to look at is messaging, imagery. So the Colorado School of the Mines, in their diversity resources, has this activity called A Picture is Worth 1,000 Words. And it encourages people to go and look at the visuals in various parts of the campus, so in the halls or whatever, and see what imagery is there and what message that imagery is sending. And so I did this exercise, not like walking around on my campus. It's a little difficult for me right now. Although I have a really cool seated scooter that goes about 20 miles per hour that I scoot around campus with. It's pretty awesome and a little scary. But so I did this by looking at our website to see, okay, what kind of photos and things are on our website that give a message, right? What kind of message is this saying? I found it to be somewhat problematic. If you live up in our area, you will have seen some things in the news over the summer directly related to this and our Director of Media and Communications. But we see some different kinds of diversity here, right? For an academic setting, we see sports, we see music, we see people teaching, we see the representation of our Native American Awareness Week, where our Nez Perce students and faculty come and they set up teepees and we have sessions, we have all these things. Our president with the new CTE Center. Some things that were missing for me were people with disabilities, which has been something I've thought a lot about lately, having mobility issues myself. And that's something I have to work on. But when I came here and I flew, and I had to have a wheelchair at the airport because I can't walk that far or stand for very long, and what that felt like, and the way people looked at me was really revealing, simply because I couldn't walk on my own. But that's missing here. There are people of color, but as I looked at these photos on our website, they're the same couple of people in canned photo shoots, like the same group of people all around town in different poses, right, doing different things. So there are some problematic issues for me as I look at that. So I encourage you to go through if you have a music wing at your school, if you, your hallway, just even your classroom, your folders, the repertoire that you're doing, what message does it send? What kind of, think of it from a hospitality standpoint, right? Is it sending this idea and creating an environment that's radically hospitable to all people that are going to come into your space? So I want to end by going back to the labyrinth idea. So as you're going through this journey, as you're thinking about your cultural competence, like I said, it's a journey that you have to do yourself. You have to do the work yourself. And it starts with looking at your own identity and what that means. And from there, we're moved to take action and to figure out what works for us and our own ensembles and settings, which is why I'm not going to say, here, do this repertoire, here, do this, here are these steps. It doesn't really work that way. So as you're on this journey through the labyrinth, as you're going into the center, you're always going to encounter people who are coming out from the center. And those people may be on their 5th or 6th journey, they may be on their first journey, but they're people you can learn from. They've had different experiences in the labyrinth. They looked in different places. They learned different things. And so that's a place we can learn. But then when we're coming out from the labyrinth, you're going to run into people who are just entering, some maybe for the first time. And that's where sometimes this can be frustrating. And like Seth said, he said it best, sometimes we need to just shut up and listen, right? We may know a bit, but sometimes people need to talk through what they've learned to gain a better understanding. We don't even need to say anything, right? And that enlightenment comes on their own simply by working through those things. So it's funny, I think it's really funny, Serena said, Sarah's been a mentor. I'm like, I do not see myself as a mentor on this material. For me, it's just sharing where I am in my journey, which is different every single day, and the work that I do. So as we think about it, there's no right or wrong way to do this work. There's no right or wrong way to explore, to go through the labyrinth. The important thing is that we make the attempt to do it. You'll make mistakes. We all make mistakes. I make them all the time. But I learn and keep going. And I do things very differently. I mean, I hate to go back to think about my first year of teaching. I was in an inner city school in South Seattle, and I probably do things a lot differently now than I did then. So it's just part of the journey that we take. So thank you for listening, and I hope that I've got my references are here, or my resources are here. I can send a link to maybe to Serena. She can send this out if you want my slides. That's totally fine. That's good. If you haven't seen Labyrinth, go watch it. Think about the journey. I will warn you, it does get a little weird with David Bowie and the baby when you get to the middle of the labyrinth, but it is interesting. So, but wherever you are, keep moving on the journey. So, thank you. Thanks.